Well, welcome everybody. Thank you for coming over here on this Thursday evening. I wanted to recap kind of where we are and where we're going, but I thought first we could go around the room and just do some quick introductions. So I'll start off. I'm Brian Culpa. I'm the town supervisor, and we'll go to my right.
Alyssa Shields, Zoning Board of Appeals.
Mark Roundtree with the Erie County Department of Environmental Planning.
Good evening, Kelly Dixon, planner from the Greater Buffalo-Niagara Regional Transportation Council.
David Minjoya, Amherst IDA.
Brian Andrzejewski, Building Commissioner.
Alan Koft, Amherst Planning Department.
Kim Impleman from the Amherst Planning Department as well.
Lori Stillwell with the Amherst Planning Department.
Amy Corrado with the Amherst Planning Department.
Dan Howard, I'm with the Amherst Planning Department.
I'm Kevin Howard, I'm with Code Studio.
Scott Marshall, the Amherst Planning Department.
Dal Giuliani, the Amherst Planning Board.
John Radin, Zoning Board of Appeals.
Jackie Berger, Town Board.
All right, perfect timing. So tonight we're going to get in. We are fortunate enough because we have the Congress for New Urbanism conference coming up the next couple days to have a member of Code Studio with us. So Kevin, thank you for joining us live and in person tonight. I want to back up for a second and just kind of recalibrate where we've been, how we've gotten to where we are, and ultimately where we're going. So, you know, we're on the sort of tail end or the second leg of a two-part project that the town was undertaking. And the first part really looked at the sort of readdressing issues that we had more or less around shopping centers in the town plan and the town's comprehensive plan, and addressing how we treated those facilities. The town's comprehensive plan had been largely structured around standalone, single-use, single-occupancy, big box and shopping centers that reflected a 1980s, 1990s thought process in retail. And there was a committee formed, and Dale was the chairman, who did a lot of work to get new ideas about shopping centers and how we treat some of the zoning language specific to our general business and retail climates throughout the town. This portion of the work is the zoning that needs to change in order to actually see implemented change in those centers. It's going to be very heavily technical. That's not to say we're not going to try to make sure that audience and residents in the town can't follow along, but it'll be a little bit more technically focused. And what we're going to try to do, if you look on the screen, you know, it's a small image there, but you know, we had that question came up yesterday about Imagine Amherst, and I think that the question about Imagine Amherst really has. It's been a conversation that through the town has been a little diluted. People think that it's something more than it really needs, than it really was. It was an opportunity to refine parts of our comprehensive plan and do some targeted zoning work. And so last night I sort of had an opportunity to tell people we're coming back in this evening to rezone shopping centers. And I said, does that mean that we're going to drop big, giant, mixed-use development at the corner of Klein and Paradise? No, we're working on shopping centers. And, you know, we just kind of kept following up on that same question. You know, the thought that this is something about Westwood, that there's something more pervasive here than, you know, a technical zoning project, something that I've been trying to work through. At the end of the day, you know, we're working towards a hybrid form-based code. And the hybrid form-based code, and there's an example, you know, I know you're not going to be able to read it, but what pages and content are gonna look like, right? We're actually going to tell the development community, here's what we're looking for on these intersections and in these places. Here's what we want your building to more or less look like. We can't completely control that, nor do I think we want to, but void of having an architectural review board, we need to introduce form as a conversation piece, because otherwise everything's unchecked and we're getting product that's unintended. The other thing that's unchecked is, if you're a developer, you don't have sort of the assurity that, this is really what the town's looking for. So it does two things. It helps the developer come in with a better product, and it helps the town because we have that certainty that they're going to stay within a restricted area. So, we have in the past done a large number of charrettes regarding some of these topics. Charrettes looked at form and spacing and setbacks, and then out of those charrettes, we created scenarios, and those are scenarios that are they're conceptual. They're not meant to be a hard and fast, this is exactly what we want on that site. They're meant to inform the zoning as to what kind of look, aesthetic, quality we are looking for. That said, part of the original contract with NYSERDA and with Code Studio is the town was going to do a check. The town board adopted comprehensive plan amendments in December. The current town board in January said, hey, we want to do a check our parameters to make sure that what we've shown people is really what they're looking for. And so as part of our current comprehensive planning effort, we split the town into 10 parts, mostly following fire districts, and went to the community and said, hey, we have a couple of questions. One of those had to do with the look and aesthetic of buildings and development in your areas and neighborhoods. The second had to do with specific issues in your neighborhoods through a concentric circle exercise. I'm not going to recap all of that. The planning department did a wonderful job putting together boards that explained the raw data from those, and those are up on Town Hall, on the second floor of Town Hall on the walls right now. So one of the things we did was a visual preference survey. Again, I know the graphics are small there, but we showed a series of graphics and we asked people to score those. We also took this product to Windermere Elementary and Forest Elementary's ice cream socials, and basically said, hey, we want to see scoring. So there's reds and blues and some places scored stuff higher, some places scored stuff lower. There were some things that popped out as obvious. Williamsville and Eggertsville preferred three-story, sort of three usable story as their sort of sweet spot for development, and Snyder scored that 2.5 story thing. You could see that versus North Amherst, who wants no development. You could see that across all these communities were saying, hey, we do want to see change through better development, but we don't want to be treated the same in each neighborhood. So Snyder's different from Williamsville. Williamsville is different from Eggertsville. Eggertsville is different from Willow Ridge. Willow Ridge is a lot different than Swarmville. Swarmville is different than Main Transit. It was, it became an obvious issue that there are some similarities, but then there are physical changes and attribute changes. If you're in Williamsville, neo-colonial sort of was, that was that kind of that look, or that almost neo-federalist look. If you were in Snyder, it was a Tudor preference, and you could see it matches a lot of the context of those places. So, we scored, and from that, Kim's developed a spreadsheet of calibrations that we want to do as a town board to those amendments that were passed in December, and so we're going to be modifying those amendments in a parallel path to this. But those are going to inform how we manipulate the zoning and the form-based zoning moving forward. The other portion that was tasked here was a code assessment report. So that was an opportunity for Code Studio to look at all of our zoning code and sort of give us an assessment of where product might not be meeting our expectations or where we're falling off or falling behind. And I think that's here, right? You have a copy of that, and we're going to distribute. Everything that we put out and that you get a draft version of is going to be available online. And, you know, it'll be clearly drafts, but, you know, as we move forward here, I don't want surprises about where we're going with the zoning to become a challenge later on. And the next sort of step here is going to be, I very seldom have to hand over a PowerPoint remote, so that felt very strange to me. And now I'm going to put down the microphone, which is even weirder. But if you look at where we're heading here, you know, we're going to head in right away into the sort of technical aspect of that. I'm going to let Kevin take it away.
I'll just start off real quick here just to kind of recap here. So I think folks are generally acquainted with this map. We've talked about it before. It's part of the comprehensive plan now. And Brian mentioned it delimits the areas that we're going to be focused on in this project in terms of areas that are open for discussion in terms of their zoning. These are the commercial and mixed-use areas that were delimited in the comprehensive plan that was put together in the early 2000s. Our charge was to take those and begin to look at ways to make those areas represent the kinds of places that we hope to achieve or hope to have in the comprehensive plan. As Brian mentioned, didn't work out that way in some cases. We had this one-size-fits-all zoning concept that yielded development that was just about the same no matter where you went in town, did not fit within the context of its surrounding neighborhoods. That was really the charge here with this project. This map is an outcome of the work that the committees did over the last couple of years to identify what we would call a form of development and different types of development, which I'll talk about in a moment, and then identify places in the town where those forms and type combinations would best be located. This is not a zoning map. And I want to be clear about that. This is a plan map. This map outlines areas where we think the form and type ought to be represented and as described in the plan, and I'll show you that in a minute. The next step from this in terms of geography is to define places where the zoning will specifically be located, and that will be a charge of this committee over the course of the next couple of months. So, in the comprehensive plan, we identified two forms of development, traditional form and a suburban form, and outlined several characteristics of those places. I'm not going to read them. I don't think you guys have them. I might try and read them. It might not. It might be ugly with the one eye here. But generally speaking, you know, the traditional form is similar to what we see on Main Street in Snyder and Eggertsville. We have buildings pulled up to the sidewalks. There's generally no setback in the front or very shallow setback. There's some streetscape there in terms of trees, sidewalks, tree grates, things like that. There's generally parking along the street in front of businesses or residences, such as it might play itself out in the area that we're looking at. Signage is generally attached to the wall and in scale with the building around it, and the speeds on the roads are generally lower than they might be on some of our more busy arterials. And what we find on those arterials is more of a suburban form. So places like Sheridan Drive, Niagara Falls Boulevard, Transit Road, where the setbacks from the street are much broader and deeper. Sometimes there's landscaping in the front, sometimes not. Sometimes there's very limited landscaping in the front, and there's parking definitely in the front of these places. We have monument signs or signage that isn't always attached to to the, you jumped ahead on me there. You're really testing here. And sometimes there's parking in front, and again, the speed limits here generally are higher, 35 to 45 on some of the major arterials. So two different forms, recognition that there's two different forms of development out there. And then within those two forms, we find 4 different scales of center. Okay, low scale node. These are generally located at the at street intersections, but they typically are located in smaller areas. So Egerton, Maine and Harlem, small areas like that. Shallow parcel depth. This is a challenge in many of our along many of our arterials and roads. And then the buildings here tend to be 1 to 2.5 stories in height, possibly 3, depending on where it is. The next scale up, and so the image that you see here, an exemplary image, is Harlem in Maine. Next up is a medium scale node. These can be located near single-family residential. This happens to be the Gettsville Plaza. The parcel depth is a little bit bigger, so the setbacks tend to be a little different and a little deeper. And here, you might find buildings that are between 1 to 4 stories in height. We also have a lot of commercial corridors. I alluded to a couple of those already. Transit Road, Sheridan Drive, Niagara Falls Boulevard, where you have a strip of commercial development. These can be located near single-family homes or just adjacent to other non-residential uses, including business parks and other institutional uses. These generally will have a consistent parcel depth. So if you look at the depth along Niagara Falls Boulevard, you'll see that it's fairly deep, maybe 100, 200, 300 feet in some cases. Or if you look at the depth along Sheridan Drive, in certain areas you'll find a much shallower depth, maybe less than 200 feet for a long distance along the corridor. So that depth tends to be consistent. Here you can find buildings from 1 to 5 stories, depending on the location and the adjacent development. And finally, we have centers. And these are the largest areas that we have. These are generally located away from single-family development. The example that's shown here happens to be the Golden Triangle, it's called often, Millersport Highway, Maple Road, and the I-290, where the Marriott Hotel and a couple other hotels are located. And there's a large 5 or 6 story mixed-use building located there as well. Generally not adjacent to single-family residential, so those higher intensity, density buildings that can be anywhere from 1 to 8 stories. The Marriott, in fact, I think is 11 or 10 or 11, depending on how you look at it. These parcels are very large and deep. So we've got these 4 types of places with 2 different forms. The committee used those to define places in the town where those forms and types ought to be looked at and perhaps enhanced, preserved, or changed as a result of this zoning project. So the map that you have that looks like this, and I think everybody's got it again, is the map that accompanies the town's generalized land use plan in the comprehensive plan, which is called Figure 6. You might hear us refer to it that way. It calls out all the different land uses that are anticipated in the future. This one is 6A. This refers only to those areas that were identified as commercial or mixed use when we started this project. I'm going to caveat this a little bit and make sure people are understanding that there are places that are zoned commercial in the town that are not on this map. So the charge was to take the comprehensive plan map as it stood, which was a concept and a vision for the future, and look at the commercially designated land and the mixed-use designated land on that map. There are several parcels in town where we have commercial zoning that were not identified in the comprehensive plan for that use. The hope was they would transition into some other use later on. So we have some outliers in the town that we're going to have to deal with along the way as well. Next slide. And actually, I'll let Kevin take it from here.
So this is the code framework the committee helped develop. You can see in the first column the designation that we were kind of seeing on that map. You can see that some of them start with T, those are the traditional. Some of them start with S, that's the suburban, and then you kind of have an acronym for the 4 different scales of development: the low-scale node, medium-scale node, corridor, and center. And you can see them written outside that. So I'm going to go into kind of some of these other elements of the framework, the uses and the frontages and transitions and so forth.
I'm going to interject real quick, just for a little historical perspective on this. The committee that worked last year on the plan amendment had this information. So as part of that, the development of that plan amendment, the committee asked for a good level of insight into what the zoning would look like to operationalize the ideas that were being considered for the comprehensive plan. So this zoning framework has actually been out for a while. This was used by the committee to help identify places for this map and the text that's in the comprehensive plan.
The first element we can talk about is height. So you can see, so first of all, a lot of the area that we're talking about is zoned either GB or SC, both of which allow up to 65 feet in height. So we're talking about a whole new palette of heights, for the vast majority of which are being decreased from where they are today at 65 feet. So you can see 2.5, 3, 3.5, and 4. And then there's also the addition of the 8, which accommodates places kind of like the Hyatt, where you have a 10-story building.
I'm going to interject, because I think something that was lost on the public a lot was the fact that the current zoning allowed 65 feet. And people were projecting that this committee was trying to increase heights to 65. In fact, the majority of properties were recommended at lower heights, the exception being some of those 8s, but yeah.
And here's an example. Right now, the building on the left and the building on the right have the same height limit. They're both allowed 65 feet. Yeah, and that's not really the appropriate height limit for these across the town. So having a height district that matches the character of the context makes a lot of sense, and that's something we can roll out with these zoning districts. And you can kind of see a little bit more 3D how those districts and the different center types might fit in those height designations. You can see an example of a step back as a massing technique used to help with compatibility on the 5-story element there, and then the 2.5, you can kind of see how that might fit in the same scale as a 3-story, but it kind of gives a better sense a lower sense of scale at the street. This is a sample code page, and so once you know your district, you open this up, and you have the color of your zoning district. It'll be the same color as it is on the map. It'll be on the edges of the page. You can see that the second you open it up. And it has essentially the majority of the standards that you'll have to understand. We cover site design standards, bulk and mass standards, and activation standards. The activation standards are that kind of nuanced sort of standard that help us get at those human scaled elements, spacing of doors, pitch of roofs, things like that really help. The urban space of the public right-of-way and the sidewalk feel activated. So we will explain a lot of that in the rules of measurement, but taking a look at this page, you'll see your basic standards about how much window is required for your ground story versus your upper stories, how many doors would be required for your building, things like that. So transitions is a big issue, and especially on some of these corridors. This is Transit Road, one of the pilots that we explored last year. And you can see on the left-hand side are some really shallow commercial parcels abutting existing single-family homes. And then on the right you have some deeper parcels. And how they transition to the neighborhood could actually be different based on the size of their lot and the depth of their lot. So this is what the code page might look like. It tells you if you're next to one of these zoning categories below, then you have to provide this buffer. And in this case, in a shallow lot, that might include a wall, and it might include some vegetation screening, Also some bulk standards that above 2 stories, you have to set your mass away from these protected districts. And that you can see how that might change for a deeper lot. More vegetation, deeper lots are more likely to accommodate greater heights, and so above 3 stories, you have an additional bulk setback requirement. And there could be also some use transitions that we could bring into play as far as transitioning from commercial to residential as you approach the protected districts. So that was kind of the back edge of the site, and this is more of the frontage, how it addresses the street. And so these were really calibrated in the planning process based on what's there today. If we have a village frontage today, we should map it as such. If we have a green frontage today with a lawn with the building set back from the sidewalk, we can zone that way in the future. Suburban can happen the same way, and in certain areas you might have what we are calling a residential frontage. It doesn't matter the use. It doesn't matter if it's lawyers' offices or whatever the use is. It doesn't matter. It's in a house today, and that form might be desired to continue moving forward. And so this is what the code page might look like for some of those things. And, this would almost be like an overlay on the zoning that says, in addition to your underlying zoning, you have these other requirements. Maybe your pedestrian access, essentially your door spacing might have to get more frequent because you're in a more active section of the street, especially in a village frontage. This is maybe your main shop front, sort of main street frontage. And then, so we have uses, and this is kind of the new modernized way that we are displaying uses on a consolidated table. You can kind of compare across the districts how the uses are being handled. But one of the best things about the way we can look at this is the same color that's on the map, the same color that's on the page. I can go look at TCOR 2.5/3. That's the color of my page, and I can look at my allowed uses just following that same color. Really boon to usability. So in addition to that, we have concepts about streets and blocks. This is especially important for the larger suburban scale, or larger scale suburban centers, where moving forward you might want to add walkability and permeability to these sites, where you can drive through them easier, or you can walk through them easier, and what setting a maximum block size is really important to that, so you don't get massive super blocks. In addition to that, we might have standards for new streets. These new internal streets that would be required to meet the block standards would have minimum specifications. And this wouldn't have anything to do with existing streets that are there today. It'd be only for new ones that are being built in order to meet these standards. Right. And then, so backing all of this up, we have rules and measurement section, which follows the same outline as you saw on those pages. You remember the third column was bulk and mass. Section 792 is bulk and mass. Every standard in the form district or in the district page will have a section. So A, top plate height. That was a standard in the table. If you want to understand more about what top plate height is, you can go here. There will be an illustrated, easy to understand diagram about what does this mean and how is it measured. Is it applicable to me? Also, at the bottom of this page, you can kind of understand in some of those half-story, 2.5, 3.5-story districts, what does it mean to be half a story? Is an attic half a story? Well, maybe not. Maybe only stories with dormers that are less than 50% of your building length count as a story. And more than that, a super dormer counts as a full story and would be a 3-story building in this case. So just kind of illustrating the concepts clearly and explaining them in bulleted text below, making it so you don't have to be a lawyer to understand the zoning code. And so using that structure, the idea is that we could build a document that we could accommodate the town-wide zoning in the same format, modernize it, reformat it, use the same sort of illustration techniques to make it really clearly legible and for the entire zoning code, not just the mixed use in commercial areas. So moving forward, We've got some major milestones to hit. This is a very quick project. We've got code drafting happening up until January, where it goes to public review, and you guys will be participating in that whole process. We have the finalized draft code happening in February, and then training and education and code adoption after that, past March. So it's an accelerated sort of project, and so we're going to get to work.
Yeah, again, so the reason for this accelerated approach is we did get an extension on the contract for the grant that basically underwrites this project through NYSERDA. So we have some fiduciary responsibilities to meet. But the second thing is we continue to see markets warming up across town. We have, and I'll include this next time around, but we have the luxury of having an opportunity zone, which is a federal tax creation that allows investment to basically shelter capital gains for an institution, and that comes online in January. So there will start to be some push, especially around the Ridgely. That opportunity zone runs from Niagara Falls Boulevard to the 290. From the 290, if you can picture it as a triangle, down to Sheridan Drive. So the Boulevard Mall, sites like that, are squarely within this opportunity zone, and so we expect a lot of entities that own parcels there. Yep, and some non-parcel holders to start to really look at that. If you'll recall, recently Belmont Housing was granted a change of zoning by the town board, and one of the unsettled issues there was, what are the buildings going to look like? Had we had this type of zoning in place, then it would have been calibrated to look and have the aesthetic and the setbacks that we as a community put forth. So I recognize that we're asking for a fairly steep task here, which is going to require a lot of review offline, sometimes homework. I think the group that we have assembled here are very dedicated people to the town who are going to be committed to seeing this through. So I'm going to ask everybody to really buckle up, but I'm confident that this is a group that can put something in place that will take a lot of guesswork out of what's coming in the future. The second piece of this is, by the nature of what we're doing here, we are essentially supercharging the zoning board, right? Because variances against form all of a sudden become area variances. And so the zoning board's going to be having to take on and shelter some responsibilities that have oftentimes a design implication to them. So, we're going to really focus on training at the head end of this thing as we draw into March, really concentrating on getting the zoning board and planning board, but zoning board up to speed on what it is their new product is to look after, and amongst other things, we're talking internally about how we recalibrate our offices to be able to work with a code like this. So there's some shifting around of things that's going to happen within town hall. So with that, we're going to open this up to questions. Dan?
Yeah, just let me make clear, amongst the documents that you received tonight, and we will provide you with a 3-ring binder at the next meeting to put this material in, but amongst the documents you have there is the town's contract with Code Studio. And I would tell you that as you go through that, we are focusing here on tasks 7, 8, and 9. That's what we need to execute in order to complete the work that we desire here as part of this project, and to meet the contractual obligations we have with NYSERDA. So I want to make clear that this period of code adoption, which will likely occur after March, is in fact the public's opportunity, not the only one, but we'll have a generous opportunity afterwards to consider this code. Okay, we're not rushing to code adoption by the end of March. The standard is to get a draft code in place that reflects what we're looking for out of this project. I just want to be clear about that. We're not hustling up, I'm going to get caveat here, but we're not intending here to usurp any kind of review that the community may desire as part of this process.
No, yeah, absolutely. The other thing is kind of a quiet group, right? Meeting one here is, I hope that everybody gets excited about it. This is really the opportunity for us to change the face of the town of Amherst for the foreseeable future via code in a relatively short time span, and that in and of itself. So earlier today, I'm sitting there in my office with PowerPoint open, dealing with town planning and a presentation for tomorrow morning, and Dan and Kevin come up to my office because they want to run through this PowerPoint with me, and I've got AC/DC playing in the background, so, the songs, I got Shoot the Thrill, come playing. Kevin sits down, opens up the PowerPoint, I'm like, looking at zoning, listening to AC/DC. This is exciting. But for us policy wonks, this is really as good as it gets, because, what we put down on paper is going to have immediate repercussions as permits come in, as applications come in. So hopefully everybody will be excited by the work that's in front of us, and we'll try to keep things moving along.
The other thing to recognize here is that, and I've heard this several times over the last couple of years, we have this grant from NYSERDA, we have this grant from NYSERDA. We have this grant from NYSERDA because they believe that this community has the capacity to pull off something that hasn't really been done across New York State, and that's to introduce a different way of looking at zoning in suburban communities. Okay, this is taken off in the cities all over the place. It's not typical of suburban communities. So this last piece that you see where it says training and education, that's our opportunity to speak with other folks involved in zoning, be they design professionals, developers, staff in other departments or other communities around the region, more than likely, about this experience and more importantly about this product. We could expect that some of this, if not much of it, they would seek to adopt in their own communities, because this is the way communities are trying to better plan and build themselves. And so this is something to be excited about, and it is exemplary. And I think the products we've gotten so far are pretty good. They get us along the way where we want to be, and they are informative, and they probably are somewhat unique across the state. And the code to come should hopefully fulfill the same level of excitement and excellence that the plan will. So it is an exciting opportunity. That's as enthusiastic as I'm going to get.
It's twice as enthusiastic as I was expecting. So, any questions, thoughts, or comments here?
I see you have us designated every other week for about 4.5 months. Is this just a block time, or is there actually work products associated with each of these dates? Not that I have a problem with homework, especially when it's winter and I can't swing the golf clubs anymore. So this is fine, but
okay. Let's just say these are placeholders, if you will. If I could meet with you every 2 weeks, I'd love to do that. Especially you, Dave. Don't see enough of you anyway. However, let me say this. There's a lot to be done here. There's a lot of work that Code Studio needs to do. We've talked a little bit today. We'll be talking a little bit more in the next couple of days about a specific schedule for actual work products. But For now, look at these as placeholders. We'll get information out to you as soon as we can. It would be our intent to try and meet this schedule, but not without meaning, okay? I'm not gonna call you here just to look at you, even though I like you. So, I can't say for certain that every one of these is gonna be a meeting, and there'll be a new work product to review. I do understand that this is pretty aggressive. I got it, but this is where we're at. So, and this is what we have to do. And, it might actually be easier this way, just to kind of plow through it. And like I said, we get to the end, we've got a good product, and then we can do what we need to do to fully implement that. So we'll try and give you a heads up as early as we can about meetings or change of meetings. I think I'd like to be able to commit to you that we won't look for meetings outside of these dates, if that helps. And then, as we come upon these dates, we get closer to these, we'll try and give you as much heads up as to changes to that.
And, the other thing I guess I want to mention is, this is, Code Studio is going to be doing a lot of work, and presenting us with work to make decisions on, but this is really to this group to tell Code Studio what we want, right? This shouldn't be, no offense to Code Studio, but it should not be a consultant-driven process here. We need to drive the ship and say, here's what we're looking for. There's nothing here that's, secretive. If you want to run idea off somebody or ask a question while you're doing homework, feel free. At the end of the day, I think we're going to turn around a package that the town board can stand behind and get behind and adopt, and that's going to have some really great outcomes economically here in the town for a while.
Yeah, and if you look around the room, you'll see a lot of people with planning department under their name on these tags. So we have most of our professional staff here tonight. They're going to be involved in this project as we go forward. And so if you have questions along the way, don't feel like you have to call Dan. He probably won't know the answer anyway. You can call other folks on the staff and ask questions. If there's nobody around that can answer your question, feel free to ask any of us. We'll try our best to get back to you as soon as possible, and address questions you might have along the way. And if we can't answer it, we'll get an answer for you.
I have one question. I was wondering if you would provide some examples of living, breathing codes that are similar to what we'll be doing, that we could see how they are in other municipalities as a reference, just so maybe, I'm not sure, I'm not familiar with a hybrid right now, and I'd really love to see hybrid in action. Do you have any suggestions of where to look?
So, as a rule, we don't really, we create codes that are unique to every single condition that we work in. So there's not going to be a code that we can point you to that's going to be an example of what you're going to get. But we've worked all across the country in a bunch of different contexts, different economies, and our website is a great source for that information. We have some kind of featured projects, but we've always provide a link to the actual zoning code. So you can just go to code-studio.com and you can find a lot of our work. The one that's probably been getting the most action is Denver. That was at the very beginning of Code Studio. I was not involved, you could imagine. And that one's, they've gotten a lot of use out of that code. It was really early on in our thinking, but every month we educate ourselves too. So yours is going to be the most up-to-date, state-of-the-art code by the time it's done, because that's how we work through it.
Then do you have any suggestions of codes that would be the wrong thing to do, something that was a failure that we could also see to know what not to do?
Well, so the one that comes to mind, I don't know if I'm supposed to say this, but we're out of Austin, and we recently had a rezoning project called Code Next, that was an $8.5 million project that was just thrown out. So that's a good example.
Something that we can see online, or is
Yeah,
it
there's
thrown out?
tons of material
Okay.
online. There's 3 drafts that have all been thrown out.
And it was a hybrid, or it was this?
It was forced to be a hybrid, yes. It was not a good hybrid. We didn't do it. And we had a lot of problems with it, but we also didn't talk about it a lot because it was in our hometown, and it was a competitor of ours, and so we don't deal with that.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
On a more local scale, Buffalo Green Code, it's more probably a little more towards traditional form based on a hybrid. But there's some examples of how that's been applied, some of the issues that have come up with different projects under that. And then Williamsville has more towards the hybrid side, or more towards the traditional side, has a hybrid form base that resulted in projects like Maine and Hirschfield. So there's you can kind of see directly how that project would come about, and we could look at some case studies for how that flowed through various departments.
Yeah, and something on an example that's coming to mind that we worked on was Raleigh. It was a good example. It was it's not our current thinking, but it's worked really well, and it's continued to be a living, breathing document that they've actually hired us to make some adjustments to based on new market context. It seems to be working really well. And it's also getting a ton of use. So there's a lot of cases where you see exactly how the code has affected the built environment around it. And even as we revisit the city, we can go around and identify exactly which buildings were built under the old code and which buildings were built under the new code. And it's a really powerful experience.
2 questions. Want to clarify. I assume signage is under the scope, is in the scope? You had mentioned some of the stuff where signs on the side of buildings would be scaled to the building. And so you kind of have a look of like you're not sure.
Well, yeah, I don't know if you want to talk about what's in scope, what's out of scope, but generally speaking, signage is dealt with a set of design standards that are sort of a ride-along here. What would be in here is the location of a sign board, usually on the face of a building, traditional design, possibly types of signage that are allowed or excluded, and some thought to dimensionality, but without getting probably into the specifics of shape, color. This isn't a full set of design standards for signage.
Yeah, no, that's fair. In the past, it really depends on the need. If there's an underlying sign ordinance that really gets at what you want, adding a little bit that makes that limits sign types and things to more pedestrian oriented in traditional areas is something that can be done pretty simply. But we have done a full gamut range of sign regulations that include types and allocation.
The other part, it was under T&E, I think. You mentioned that for the zoning board, we're going to, I wasn't sure exactly how you said it, but it brought the concern up that we do have a test, a 5-point test for area variances. And so we have a form, we have a code, someone goes, well, that's not going to work for me. I need a 4-foot setback. And then we get into that, and then do you see that this might, is there any way they could mitigate the number of variance requests there would be?
So my goal in any planning work I've ever done, and now as a town board member, is say if we assign new zoning, our goal would be to not see a lot of variance issued against that new zoning, right? And we're essentially saying this is what we want. The moment that we start opening up a ton of variances, the less stable that zoning gets, right? So it's one of the issues that City of Buffalo struggled with Green Code. Right out of the gate, the Zoning Board of Appeals was a little eager to, not hold everybody's feet to the fire, and started to issue some variances kind of quickly, and it really took a lot for the city to sort of say, no, this is law, this is what we want, don't stray. And the difference in cost for somebody to produce a building that would meet our goals that we're going to set forth in here versus a building that they're going to do otherwise with a series of variances attached is actually probably going to be pretty minimal, right? I'll give an example of something that we've seen recently that we didn't have the luxury of having a form-based zoning to apply to, but we had a project come in for an urgent care at Harlem and Kensington that met our zoning requirements, that would have been in front of the planning board for a site plan review, but when we saw it come in with its setbacks and elevations, there was sort of a moment from the town board. I don't know how that plays out on a recording or in the minutes, but the sound. Supervisor hissing at a product. At the end of the day, we were able to reach out to that developer and I think get a much better product out of it, but it had to come through a lot of conversation and wishful thinking and hope. And it worked out because we had somebody who was very willing to work with us and partner with us to get a better product. The same product, similar product costs. It's not like things strayed, but we were able to say, this is what we want, and they were able to build to what we want. And that's the case in a lot of circumstances, right? You're talking about somebody building a $5 to $10 million building, haggling over the last $30,000 of material usage or sign placement, or whether or not they put an extra tree on the site. Those are things that are relatively minimal, but what happens is when a zoning board is dealing with a variance and trying to negotiate the terms of a variance, or the planning board is getting a site plan review and trying to not completely jam up a project from moving forward, is you're arguing about that $30,000 at the final step after design's been done and paid for. And so now it's contentious because now somebody's got to go pay a designer again, and their margins have slimmed down, they've built to their margin, and now you want me to add more money on trees, planting, screening? And if you tell them that up front and they design for it, that $30,000 dissipates in that $2.5 million adventure or that $5 million adventure pretty quick. So this idea is to say we're going to put everything on the table in front of you, and if you really need a variance because you cannot build a set to that setback because the streets aren't turning at 90 and one street cuts in a little closer and your building placement's going to be off by 3 or 4 feet, fine, go to the zoning board, we still have that capacity. At the end of the day, what we're doing is we're pre-cooking the product for people. So, and we're giving people the opportunity to collect rent revenue off of mixed-use second and third story in some cases where they wouldn't normally see that.
Yeah, I think in answer to John's question is, we're not just looking at the commercial districts here, and the intended zoning of those. We're also, as part of this project, we're going to have to look and see how those districts impact the other sections of code that apply to all districts, such as parking, landscaping, lighting, all those, and incorporate what we need to accomplish what's in the new commercial mixed areas into those sections as well, while still retaining the parts in those sections that would still apply to the other districts of the code, that the industrial and the residential districts and special use districts. So, as part of this, we're going to have to look at all those pieces, not just the commercial section of the code.
That's the basis for the code assessment, the beginnings of that code assessment, are places in the existing code, not all of them, but many of them, that will probably need to be looked at and modified to take into account some of the new things that are being introduced here, and other things that might help modernize the code.
Anybody else? This will be like the one time we finish within the hour. Probably the only. So we're going to leave it off here. Next time we get together, we're going to have some discussion about, sort of that, we're going to be writing the code, and we're going to be essentially working through, basically the future law of the land here.
Yeah, so, the next time we're gonna meet is Thursday, November 1st. At that time, hopefully you'll have had a chance to go through the code assessment, get familiar with that product. You should have a pretty good understanding of what the charge is over the next several months, the completion of those 3 tasks. There's a lot to be done there. So please bear with us and understand it, and we understand that there's a lot to be done there. Hopefully over the next several days, we'll talk to Code Studio early next week. We'll get a fix on when we'll see the first piece of code that you'll begin to look at. It may just be, we may start with some of the traditional districts. We may get the suburban ones with them. We're not quite sure where that is in its development. Over the course of the last year, I know Code Studio has been working on this sparingly while we've been working through the checks and the calibration that Brian mentioned earlier. But we're going to hope to have some draft code for you to look at in the not-too-distant future. So right now, we'll reserve November 1st as a meeting date. It will be our intent to get this information out to you either electronically or otherwise, probably electronically. If you talk to me after the meeting, let me know whether electronic versions of this are difficult or challenging for you to have and get, let me know, and we'll figure out another way to do that. But you can expect that we'll send this stuff as soon as we can to you to begin to look at prior to the meeting. It may happen that we'll just distribute something at the meeting. We'll talk through that at that point in time, just given the structure of the task and the time we have available. Right.
All right. Any questions or comments from the audience? Sure.
Thank you. My name is Don Smith. I got a couple of questions. First one is scope. The question is, occurs to me that you're pushing essentially a large project into a small space. I think that's true. Is it the same scope that was originally intended by this project, or is it a reduced scope, number one? Number two, I heard mentioned here that all areas of the town, all zoning areas of the town will be affected, which means all people in the town will be affected, all stakeholders, residents, and everybody else. Therefore, I understand that maybe, I'm not sure, but this committee feels it owns the zoning changes. My contention is that the residents own the zoning changes. That's where I'm coming from, which means the residents have to be brought into the process, have to be informed more than just through the website, in a positive way, a push way, that lets them know what's going on so they can be heard. Because whatever comes out of this process, they're going to have to live with that. And frankly, I don't want anybody in the town to be surprised on what they see that comes out of here. Okay, they should say, yes, I agree with that. This is probably the best way to go. So the project has to be owned by the community, not just by this committee. That's my number one point of view here. And two, I really like to see the concept of what the scope here is. When I last talked to the supervisor, the statement was made it's only going to be about the commercial shopping centers. Now, what I heard tonight was not just about the commercial shopping centers. It's bigger than that. At least it seems to me it's bigger than that. Secondarily, I'd like to see all the information that you guys have available that's considered public, available in a way that everybody can see. Some of this right now I look for on the website, I still cannot find it, and I work with the town IT department.
Okay. I don't know offhand what is and is not available on the website, but we can certainly clean it up by meeting. Do you want to?
Sure. So the website has been transferred over from the previous consultant we used to the town website. Content that was on that website is available on the town's website. Okay, well...
Just so you know, the original website's still up.
Yeah, understood. May not be in our control. When they shut it down, they shut it down. Right now, that information is available on the town's website. You use Imagine Amherst as a keyword, search down, and get down. And what, is there something that was missing, that you think is missing from there?
First of all, on the town website, they have area 5.3 on the other but 5.3 in the task list is not on the original website, which is on this new website. The new website, all they really did was they what's called a redirector. They redirected the homepage on the original website to the town website, but the original website sits up there and it's really being used. It's available.
Well,
I've already grabbed everything off the old website that I could today.
I think we could probably sit down with the IT group or in the IT committee or web committee.
We could. I'd be interested if you could specifically tell me what the issues are with that. I'd appreciate that.
The second piece, I think the board members, I won't speak for Jackie, but the board's made it clear that this needs to be a very well publicly vetted effort. And then that's kind of my MO anyway. So we'll be doing plenty of outreach regarding the project. The last thing, the scope really hasn't changed. This is about shopping centers. I think the inference to this...
Commercial areas would probably...
Yeah, so it's not every commercial area.
But it's not just the shopping centers. I think that's where
any areas that were designated on Figure 6
right
as commercial or mixed use were considered here on Figure 6 in the comprehensive plan, not the zoning ordinance, not the zoning map. On Figure 6 in the comprehensive plan was incorporated into this map. As I said earlier, there are places that are zoned commercially today that were not designated for commercial use in the comprehensive plan. And those we're gonna have to pick up along the way. They're generally small intersection. One I can think of right now is Sweet Home Road and Eggert Road. Okay, there's commercial zoning on all four corners there that was not designated in the comprehensive plan for commercial use, because the hope was in the future that use would go away. We didn't want to say this should be commercial in the future if our intent was for it to be something else. So we understand that there's some places out there that we got to go back and address. But the scope hasn't changed. We're focused on tasks 7, 8, and 9. That's the scope.
All right.
I just wanted to add one more thing. Remember that the neighborhood forums were really important, and we had good attendance, and we've told people that we would report back, which we did last night, and that we wanted to keep them in the loop and for them to stay involved. So we'll make sure that that's happening and try and make sure the word is out. And as we move along, we'll hold other community forums.
All right, any other thoughts or questions? John?
Yeah, I do have a question on the process. I think this goes to Kevin. When we get a draft or something, work product that you gave, will it look at as it relates to, not to zoning, as it would relate to the code? Let's say something had a 30-foot setback, and you might be drafting, it ought to have a 40-foot setback. Would you have the old and the new so we can see what the change is? Or, I think that would be beneficial, to be able to see it that way, as to just saying it's 40 feet now. Well, then I go to my copy of the code and look it up.
Yeah, so generally we're dealing with two main zoning districts, and so we can kind of look at the standards associated with those two as our comparison. Especially with the accelerated work program, it's going to be really hard for us to do that kind of analysis. But we are looking at that, what's on the ground. And honestly, what's on the ground is a lot more important than what the zoning is, because the zoning never came to fruition, right? So if we're making our zoning districts based on the existing built environment, where are buildings positioned on the street? Well, we went out and measured all of them in this area, and they're between 5 and 15 feet from the street, so that's where the setback is between 5 and 15 feet. That's going to be more important than whatever the underlying zoning is today, because what we're trying to do is promote continuing that character in the community. So that could be, if you want to take that on, we would greatly appreciate it, and would love the work product. But we are going to be really
paid professional in the room.
Yeah. We are going to be working very hard, I promise you, to get this done under the time frame, and there's a lot to be done.
Does that mean that are you informed about what were maybe colossal mistakes of allowing something to be there where it shouldn't be? Even if it's present, it really shouldn't be there. And do you know where those mistakes are in town?
We've been made aware of a few at least.
So as we were talking the other day, in the planning department, Ellen, in fact, has got quite a lengthy list of issues with the code that we experience on the technical side, things that we've observed over the years that may need some tweaking. Scott works with this on a daily basis. Brian works with this on a daily basis. They're kind of aware of what those are. But I would, as I said the other day, based on your experience, which is in large part why you're here, you need to tell us what those things are, what you've seen in your experiences that cause you concern and that we need to try and address in this. So please, that's the value in having members of our committees here. You can tell us what you're seeing, what you experience, what you think are places that need to be addressed here. They have a list. They were given the list early on. I don't know if we've updated it recently, but certainly if you've got areas that you have concern, bring them up and let us know what they are so we can try and address those.
To that point then, what about we have everybody's email address that's on this, so that if I see something and I want to send, who is it to everybody, or is it to Brian, CC'd the rest of the committee? And as opposed to just, I have an idea, I send it to you, but then if I have an idea and everybody's got ideas, and all of a sudden at the end of the day there's 35 emails about ideas. So do you just want to have one person filter that? What's that process look like?
Good question. It should come to me.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and then help John.
I'll make sure it gets distributed. So if I don't get it, then it didn't go out. If I got it, I'll make sure it gets distributed to folks on the committee.
If you send an email to me, it's like dropping a coin into a wishing well. I might see it.
Nope, that's...
we know
This might make that's what we do. So, absolutely.
Yeah, for listening, John, what we're trying to do here is take the existing zoning district, for example, if we were to have the great Snyder fire of 2018 at Main and Harlem, and everything burned down, they wanted to come back in. The required setback there currently is 50 feet. Yeah. So, do you want the buildings up at the street, or rewrite code to get them there? So if that were ever to happen, or you want to see them at the Zoning Board of Appeals requesting a variance so they could put them up to the street, and having to go through more rigmarole just to get what we all want in the end of this. So basically the existing code, commercial districts will be gone. They were implementing new districts for all these colored areas on the map up here.
My question had to do with process.
Right, and mine had to do with mistakes, not things that are working in the town, things that should never have been approved, area variances that should never have, that you see in play now that we all wish had not been approved. I understand that building, And I don't think that's a failure, that's not what I envisioned, but when I heard he was looking at something on the ground, and that's how he was basing his, draft on existing conditions, some of those should not be perpetuated. And that's what I was hoping, he was well-informed of what should not be perpetuated. That's what I meant.
Well, that's kind of what's not generated.
Yeah.
Well, but to that point, those examples are really helpful. So when we go in and we continue to analyze the character that's on the ground, that we know that we're not trying to replicate that character. So highlighting those, making sure that we know about them as we're going through the mapping process with the planning department and you folks, that's going to be really important. And so knowing that up front is going to be helpful. So if you can send us a list, and especially what's helpful is if you can, when you identify a project, you highlight, the process may be important if it got a specific variance, the address, but also what about it is out of character? What about it is problematic, so that we can make sure that our metrics and our standards eliminate that as a possibility.
The other thing I think that we need to remember is that there's a lot of stuff that's been built in this town of right that is also a mistake. But our zoning created it and allowed it. And so, it's an opportunity to say, here's definitively what we want, and what we don't want, and again, this comes back to the issue of variances, right? If we take this step and we put into place something that is clearly a better product, then variances are the downfall of that product. If we're loose about this, or if we don't put in something that's market, it doesn't keep up with market forces. Not saying we have to give away the world, but if we don't put in something, and if we legislate against market forces, there's going to be big push and demand for variance. So we have to keep in mind that there's, if everywhere in the world could look like Niagara on the Lake, everywhere in the world would look like Niagara on the Lake. But the bottom line is, Manhattan can't. There's too much market pressure. So we have to figure out, how do we create a place that is both economically viable, where somebody could actually envision building that product, and at the same time something that we would look at and say we'd be proud to live near and operate near and work near and play near. All right, anybody else have any thoughts or comments or questions? All right, I'm going to move to adjourn the meeting. All in favor? All right, thanks everyone.